I know your name, so you don't need to tell me. But okay, first of all, the situation in Sweden and compared to other countries, what's the overall picture in migration and asylum?
Compared to the rest of the Europe or even rest of the world, Sweden is one of the countries which has a generous and decent, and I dare to say humane migration and refugee policies.
Sorry, can you start again? Okay.
Compared to many countries around the world, and particularly in Europe, Sweden have one of the most humane and generous refugee and migration policies. Traditionally, Sweden had most of the migration to Sweden had been refugee migration, and it has increased. Recently, again, the numbers are going up. Last year around 54,000, and this year expected to up to 100,000 people will be seeking asylum in Sweden. More than half of all the Syrian asylum seekers in Europe is in Sweden, and it has taken, and they are all granted a permanent residence permit, Syrian asylum seekers in Sweden. At the same time, Sweden has one of the most progressive labor migration laws, which came into effect in 2008 in Sweden, which allows any category of labor in Sweden, whether it's low skilled or high skilled, as long as there is an employer and they are willing to employ, then they can get a permit in Sweden for 2 years. It can be extended to another 2 years, and after 4 years, possibility for permanent residence permit in Sweden, with the right to family reunification from the very beginning for a labor migrant to Sweden, which is one of the most generous and most humane labor migration policies in Europe. At the same time, Sweden do have one of the most, Sweden do have a resettlement program. It has been traditionally a resettlement country for many, many years. The numbers are very low in compared to the United States and Canada and Australia. But half of all the resettlement places in Europe is nearly 2,000 is in Sweden, out of nearly 4,500. But it has gone up because the number of resettlement countries are increasing in Europe, and also the Germany's humanitarian visa program. But otherwise, Sweden do have, in spite of the numbers of asylum seekers increase, and yet it has also a resettlement program. And also one of the most generous contributors to the UNHCR when the humanitarian crisis in Syria or in other parts of the world. But all the same times, we do have the increased number of undocumented migrants in Sweden, partly also coming from other EU member states too.
But this sounds like the perfect state. So, what are your challenges? What are you dealing with?
It is not the perfect state. In comparison to the rest of the Europe, it has a most decent migration and refugee policies. But also, it has its own, shortcomings in the system in Sweden, and we try to address that one in Sweden. And also the issues of integration in Sweden. That's one also major concern for Caritas, and we work with that issues. We focus mostly on rejected asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, victims of human trafficking, and that's also a focus for Caritas Sweden.
The main, you spoke about Syria, of course, but what are the main migratory routes through to Sweden, and is it through Sweden or only into Sweden?
It is into Sweden, because since Sweden do have a reputation of being one of the better migration policies and refugee policies, most refugees arriving in Europe would like to go to a country like Sweden because of the granting a status, and there are basic minimum rights are granted to every asylum seeker in Sweden.
So they're coming like from all over the world, or what?
They come from all over the world. We do have people arriving from all the crisis areas from the world, from Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, Afghanistan, Syria.
Okay. And are these? Are you? Is it more and more people living in very difficult situations? Are there unaccompanied minors, things like that?
We do have the issue of the number of arrivals of unaccompanied minors in Sweden. For the last few years, it has increased to between 4,000 and 4,800, and the numbers are going up this year. Nearly 5,000 unaccompanied minors expected to arrive in Sweden based on the numbers for the last 4 months. So it is most of the unaccompanied minors are coming from places like Afghanistan, Somalia, and Syria to Sweden.
Okay. Any story of a particular person you know of? Might be a success story or a sad story?
Well, when you come to the issues of people who have been exploited, people who have been trafficked to Sweden for the labor purposes or for the sexual exploitation, that's a group which we try to support, because asylum seekers coming through once you arrive in Sweden, they have been given a fair hearing, a fair chance of going through the Swedish asylum procedure, and during that time they are given all the support needed from the state. So our additional support for Caritas Sweden and other NGOs provides is more complementary in nature, more in information and support for appealing their cases, and also preparing them for to present their cases in a proper way, and also giving the humane contact with the society in which they are coming in. Since we have a large number of people from Syria, people from Iraq, we also have the Catholic Church in Sweden, for example, has members from more than 172 different nationalities around the world. And we also have a larger presence of people from Middle Eastern countries, particularly Lebanon and Syria. We also have a large number of people from Iraq present in Sweden. So it's one of the major issues for us is also to give proper support to these people, and also to they find home in Sweden. So we also will focus on those cases where they are rejected and want to be sent back to Iraq, for example. And we wanted to support them to see how can we find a lasting solution to their problem. And in terms of, we do have stories where we succeeded finding protection for the victims of human trafficking, and also victims of labor exploitation, where we can take up their cases and find a way to address the issue and find a solution for them, either giving a residence permit in Sweden or a proper return and reintegration into the country of origin. We also have the people who have been coming from Latin America, ending up in Sweden for labor exploitation. Working together with the countries of origin, we're trying to, first of all, prevent trafficking, and the second, also given the proper information, what are the possibilities and opportunities and the rights they have attached to, and they don't need to be bound to an exploiter or a trafficker. And we successfully fought some of the cases, and the rights have been granted.